Welcome to this week's episode of Scaling Up, where we discuss the challenges business leaders face as they grow their business. We will discuss these challenges along with actions they can take to ignite sustained growth and long-term success. I'm your host, Chad Kessler. As a business owner, have you ever felt that the energy around you in your organization is dragging you down instead of lifting you higher? What if I told you that managing your own endurance as a leader could be the secret to energizing your entire team? Today, we have a very special guest, Melissa Carson, an endurance leadership coach for founders, CEOs, and HR leaders. Through her experience as a leader and as an endurance athlete, she helps business leaders understand there is no finish line. She helps business owners navigate the complex people side so that it fuels rather than drains their energy.
You're listening to Scaling Up, a podcast for business leaders.
Welcome, Melissa.
Welcome. I'm so glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So maybe tell us a little bit and tell the audience about, your background and how you ended up here.
Sure. I went on a very odd journey to get into the HR organization and never thought that was going to be a road that I took, but ended up in it as one of my second, third, fourth jobs type of thing, and then realized I really enjoyed it. So I spent the vast majority of my career in large technology organizations, so Accenture and EPAM, doing HR leadership and strategy work. And in 2019, really decided I wanted to do the parts of the job that I loved the most, where I got the most energy, which was really working with leaders around their strategy and how they, were successful for themselves and their teams. And so I've been on this journey for about 5 years and continue to really enjoy the clients that I get to work with.
That's great. That's great. And in your experience, what are some of the common drains that hit an organization and the leaders, and how can they address them?
I think there are so many right now. Just when I think about it, whether, whatever phase of an organization's growth it is, whether you're a small organization, you might be always focusing on not enough resources, or how do I get done what we want to get done? Or particularly in a small organization, even more painful when you have the wrong people, where you're realizing somebody is not going to work out. And so that's a drain. I think a lot of times when you are spending time on things that are difficult, whether it's some sort of major change that you're driving in your organization or is being driven to you, whether it was the pandemic or whether it's, the financial situation that we've gone through over the many times over the years, the global challenges across so many places. I mean, all of those things can potentially be a drain if you don't have the right support structures in place for yourself and your team to move through it.
Yeah. And I personally, I think, kind of building on that, one of the things I find is the pressure gets up, you want to go faster. And sometimes that's the wrong thing to do with the organization, because you may be able to go and do it, but you got to bring the rest of everybody else along with you. And it almost creates an anxious environment. And I think as a leader, you need to be very mindful of that. That's your experience.
Well, particularly since I don't think there's ever an end to change anymore. I mean, there might be a specific, hey, this piece of change that we're going through stops, but everything's sort of shifting. And that change might be as little as somebody's changing out on the team. Like somebody leaves, somebody takes a promotion, they move on. I mean, that kind of change happens all the time. And there's nothing good or bad about it. It's just, it happens. And then you have the bigger things. So like when you're trying to transform your organization or add a new offering. And so I think that the burnout on change, and I use burnout in quotes there, like the burnout on change is real. And so I think it's the leader's job to make sure that people, to your point, are ready to go on the journey and at the right pace. Are they with you right now? Or are they like, another thing? How am I going to do this? And, I don't get it. I mean, and that's the real big thing, is that they have to know why you're doing it and why it might be good for them to do this.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, right, it's, maybe you've finished whatever it is, the transition where somebody's left or retired, all good stuff, but you got somebody new that's come in, things have kind of started moving and going in the right direction. But have they had enough pause, enough recovery days, right, to kind of get to where you can go back out and not be sore and limping along and trying to do some of the running things and things of that nature. So I think that's a great analogy, because, then sometimes what happens is you're trying to do a change, okay, And then you get the unexpected, whether it's a pandemic or, some economic news, good or bad. And now you're doing two things at once and you haven't fully recovered the organization to be ready for that change.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Yep. So, okay, great. Is business, one of the things you've mentioned is, businesses grow, they increase their complexity, which, we see all the time, right? I mean, it tends to be where we get, called in and ask some questions. But what specific challenges have you seen arise, that will better prepare leaders to be able to foresee those changes and get the organization to be able to deal with them faster?
I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think if leaders know that they're on a path that they want to scale, like that's their vision, and many leaders are, but there's some that are like, okay, we're going to be small and stable. But it's understanding, what do we put in place right now that is working, but might not work when we double from 5 to 10 people, or 10 to 20, or 50 to 100? What are those things that you just on instinct, you're not going to know intuitively unless you've done it before, but like, hey, this, we have everybody around the round table and we talk about it, or I have my fingerprints on everybody we hire. That ultimately has to change as you grow to a certain size, or frankly, you're not going to get anything done. And you'll be the bottleneck as the CEO or founder or leader if you don't start delegating. So I think it's knowing where the cracks either already are, that as we grow, we're going to really have to watch it because it's starting to crack, or what are the potential risks that are most likely. And so your hiring process is one of those things. You might have a very formal performance process because everybody. It's the 5 people around the table, or 10 or 20. I know everybody. We kind of know it. I don't need a formal process. But you need a formal process when you start scaling. And you don't know every single person, and you don't have visibility to all of their work. And so I think those are really important to be, getting the coaching on what do I need to be thinking about as I take my business to the next level. Because I think at the end of the day, we all know this, but people are your most valuable asset. They're probably your most expensive asset for many companies. If they're not a sort of an infrastructure type company, your people are your both a cost and an asset. And if you're not doing that well, you are setting your organization up for failure.
I agree 100%. I think that one, sometimes you get caught off guard. I'm kind of chuckling because, as we've discussed, my wife's got her own business and she just landed a multi, holiday big corporate event, which is like, it's going to be for 100, 150 people. And I was like, ooh, how are you going to do that? And she hadn't done, she's like, well, you keep telling me I got to do this, this, and this. I'm like, yeah. She's like, I got to go do those now. I'm like, exactly. It was there, but it was, every time I brought him up, it was like, you're not there. Not that I'm the smartest guy. It was just, she was having fun doing what she's doing. And she never thought she could get that size event. And with one Instagram post, all of a sudden she got a phone call and a business wants to do several things with her. So those are good problems to have, right? But you got to have some of that thought process ahead of time to kind of do it. And then as the people side go, I agree with you, absolutely. You've got to, as much as you want to stay on there and it's your team and you've built it, you got to almost back away and see how they do on their own and let them kind of go out there and maybe fail a little bit. It's some of your greatest learnings. And it's a little bit hard as a leader because you want to jump in and immediately, help and get things back on track, especially when it's your own business. But I think letting them go out there and try some of the different things that, they may work or they may not work, but the learning in that is just kind of exponential, and stuff. So, and then you also, when you do that and you back off as a leader, and then it's not that they can't call you, but if they go start calling their peers, now you start getting some teamwork amongst the team, right? And stuff, and where they're relying on each other, they're helping each other, they're giving them advice. And, I guess to be pretty powerful also. So I think that's great.
I think the one key thing is for any leader who's starting to delegate or realizing that they need to, it's being really targeted around what you're doing, of what are the expectations and the outcomes that you're going to measure success, because that is the biggest failure that I see with the leader. Like, okay, how clear were they about the expectations of what that is? Well, I told them. Well, did you confirm that that's their understanding? Like, I always refer to Brene Brown's statement around painting done. Have you told the whole story? And they both understand, and you've iterated that. So I think that's critical. And then making sure you truly have delegated the authority to make the decisions, not just, hey, here's my grunt work, do it for me, and I'll take all the credit. But like, here's what I'm here for. Like, if you run into a true issue, let's brainstorm it. But I trust you to deliver this. But if there's a risk, you need to highlight it so that we don't, have it backfire in a big way.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And usually, I think a lot of times one of the things I see really successful leaders is they start to delegate. First thing they'll ask them is, well, have you talked to anybody else yet? To get everybody kind of doing that. And you're absolutely right. You've got to make it clear. You got to make sure it's understood. And a lot of times it's not. That's why you've got to kind of look back a little bit, make sure. And there's, like you said, the accountability, documentation, things of that nature you can do to kind of drive that. But yeah, it's a good problem to have, right? Your business is growing. You're trying to get to the next level, and you're trying to help people who've done a good job for you and want to do an even better job, find new ways to do things. So that's.
But I think for you as the CEO or founder or whatever leadership role, you can only do your job is to do what you do best. And if you're doing everybody else's job on top of yours, you're not doing your company that much good, because you're dabbling in all these, and you're not doing what makes you special, what you as the CEO or founder uniquely need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, we've talked a little bit about, as they're scaling and maybe they're making some of the good decisions and they're learning themselves, right, as they go to delegate, but they're, still moving in the direction they want. Maybe talk about a time, and I'm sure you've got one, where you walked in and things had gone up and they've come down quite a bit and the culture is just not right. I won't use a harsh word, but the culture is just, nobody's happy, right? And what do you kind of do to kind of address that? And what do you typically find?
I think you've got to do a little bit of research, like what is driving that, like, was it good? Like that everybody got along and it all worked? Or has it always been a little bit of problematic? And is the root issue a leader? Like what I've seen in one culture, it was a bit of a toxic leader that was driving the issues of the lack of trust in the organization. And people, sort of had to go in and look at, from a talent and culture perspective, like what's going on, what's driving the issue, how do we get beyond that? And how do we build trust with the people in the future? So I think that's one of the key things, is what's the root issue? Now, if it's a situation where you've gone through maybe a series of downsizing type of thing, you've got the survivor guilt potentially from the group, and always wondering if, hey, is the next shoe going to drop? Am I next? And so I think that transparent and authentic communication around, we needed to do this. This is why we needed to do it. We do not foresee, if you don't, I'm like, be honest. Like if you foresee there's another round coming, it's not good to lie about it. But like, you got to rebuild that trust with the team and understand, often it's a group of people or a person that's driving that culture issue. Or there's disalignment, unalignment of, we say we want collaboration, but realistically, all of our incentives are tied to an individual competitive type environment. There's a mismatch of people like, okay, well, you told me to collaborate, so I did. And now this person took credit for my work and they're getting a promotion or a raise or bonus. And I did what I was supposed to do. And so I think getting to that root cause, because I don't think there's usually one root cause of why a culture is not working beyond. There's usually a supervisor leader profile that's factoring into it.
Yeah. I whether, you get called in, there's a problem with, we're not hitting the revenue, the sales team's out, what are you going to do to go fix it? I got to figure out what the problem is first, right? It could be as much as a pricing problem, or just a market, messaging problem. Same thing with any function. You got to understand what it is. But one thing I really want to capture, when you have to give bad news, tell them clearly. In 2008, my son was being born. Okay. So he's now 16, I guess, right? So, it was that long ago. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago. And there was a leader. I mean, he came in and we had to do furloughs. And not that anybody walked out of there feeling good, but we all walked out of there and he said, we're doing 2 weeks. This is the period of time. We're going to see where we're at. There's a lot of uncertainty. I hate it. You can see him pacing up and down. When faced with a crisis, he's usually the first one to take the whole team and put him into battle. We just couldn't afford it. And he made that recognition, and you could see he was very sincere in what he said. He was very clear on what we were going to do, what the period of time is. And we came out of it, just like the majority did, not everybody, especially in the banking industry. But, we came out of it more like a team. And part of it was because of that leadership of being clear, not saying, well, maybe, I hope, it's like, that's not going to keep things moving in the right direction. So I think you're absolutely right. When you have to do those hard and challenging things, which every business is going to go through, okay, you just really need to address it effectively.
Well, and I think we saw the perfect examples of this during the early days of the pandemic of, CEOs who were choosing not to hear what they knew because they didn't know what to say. So they said nothing, which meant everybody then made up stories. Or you look at like Arnie Sorensen of Marriott, I think it's Marriott, who came out and said, here's the deal. And he was authentic and he was human around that this is really hard. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. But admitting, I don't have all the answers. Here's what we do know. Here's what we're going to do. And here's how I'm going to communicate with you going forward about anything that changes. And I think we want honesty. We want to be treated like adult. I mean, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're like, I just want to put my head in the sand and don't think about it. But at the end of the day, if that's what happens, the gossip is awful. And sometimes you get people who are thinking they need to leave and they don't. And so you got to be as honest and authentic in your communications as possible.
And the pandemic's an even better one, right? I mean, I left my house thinking, it's going to be a week because I didn't have a kitchen and all the restaurants shut down. And I came back, 6-7 weeks later, and my family didn't come back for 3 months. And we were fortunate to have a place to go. But, I didn't think it was going to be nearly that long and whatnot. And then the leaders that, like you said, with Marriott, it's like, we don't know how long until we're going to have people back in. And these are the actions we have to take, and we're going to keep you updated. And here's when we're going to update you. And that clear communication of what you know and what you don't know gets people through it. And that was an endurance event for sure. So maybe share your thoughts on the relationship between endurance and leadership. How are they interconnected, and what terms of, energizing an organization a leader can take from it?
Well, it's one of those things that I thought about recently. I am a runner. I've done a couple of marathons, a lot of half marathons and things like that. And started thinking about, when you train for that, there's a finish line. What, the end of the 26.2 or 31 or, whatever, where the finish line is. But with leadership and frankly, life, we don't really know where the finish line is. And in the world of work and leadership, it's like when we choose to opt out of being a leader, life, will take care of itself as far as that. But we need to be able to go the long haul. And I think in many cases, we act like what we're doing is a sprint. So we, run all the time. We have these deadlines. We don't take time to celebrate the wins or reflect on what worked or do the well-being things that allow us to go the distance. And so I think what I've really been thinking about recently is that it is an endurance sport where we don't know the finish line. And so we have to pace ourselves appropriately as a leader, both as us, as you think about us as the leader, as the athlete. How am I taking care of myself so I can keep showing up? But as a leader, I'm the coach for these other athletes. How am I making sure I'm creating an environment for them to be able to go the distance as well? And so that's how I've been putting them together lately.
Well, that's awesome. I think, there's always I think you're right. You got to take the time, just, whether you finish a good workout and the next workout may be terrible, you got to celebrate the good one, not get down on the bad one. And I think organizations are the same way, and if you've run multiple marathons and you've run multiple half marathons, you're planning on running another one. And the same thing with a business, you got to get out there and kind of keep along those paces. And personally, one of the things maybe as I've got a little older, running, I used to view if I didn't run a really fast pace, I failed. And I kind of kept trying to do that through my 40s and my 50s. It's not worked so well. Okay. And so you got to keep your bar, because taking $1 million business and getting it to, I'm not going to say it's easy, right? But it's trying to take a 200 million and get it to 400 million. It's a completely different scope and scale, and the amount of complexity and pieces and parts and everything in there. So I think that's always that reference point to kind of keep in mind. Not to say you shouldn't set big, audacious goals that are out there, but I think keeping the perspective what is good and what is bad in the world of marathon running, right? There's a reason why when you're 20, here's the number you need to hit to qualify for Boston. And when you're 60, it's not the same number. It's a little bit different.
And I think that's a really key point, because I think as we go into every phase of leadership or that growth trajectory that you just talked about, it's being really clear, what's my intention for this? I'm going for 200 to 4 million in X, period of time. And then the key part that we take from like the endurance training type of thing is, okay, you got to have a plan. And that plan isn't just, I'm going to go run 5 days a week. It's what kind of runs, and how am I going to fuel, and how am I going to rest? And do I need a coach? And what kinds of mindset things do I need to do? And so I think it's the same sort of thing for a leader or a CEO or founder, is to really think about, how am I going to get there? What is all the support structures that I need? How am I going to show up to do this? How am I going to get my team behind this? Do I have the right team, in the coach's role? Do I have the right team that is going to be able to deliver this? Or do I need to swap some people out? Or do I need to remotivate and re-incent them to do those things? And so sometimes we're like, okay, well, I could just go out and run that, mile or 3 miles and it's going to be great. And I could just die at the end. That doesn't work when you're in it for the long haul. Like, you're trying to grow a sustainable.
No, absolutely not. It's like, it wasn't until later that I learned about the, Lasso 800s, because I couldn't put the miles in that were required to really get to the point I wanted to be in half marathons and stuff. And so you don't have to put as many miles in. And that was really good for me, time and everything else. So yeah, that's a great example. So finally, what advice would you give to leaders who are hesitant to take the leap into refreshing their people strategy or improving their energy management?
I mean, I think just to level set, people strategy sounds like this scary thing. It sounds like, well, what is a people strategy? And it's just like you have a marketing strategy, you have a sales strategy. You have people that deliver all your work, so you need a people strategy. And that's, who do I want on the team? Why are those people going to want to be on my team? How am I going to find them? How am I going to attract them into my organization? How am I going to keep them? What am I trying to do? Am I trying to grow into a new market? That's a perfect time to say, hey, I need to refresh my people strategy, because now I'm going to go open a new local market or in a new country. Okay, well, I got to learn a whole lot of things to do that. Okay, am I going to need a sales team now there? Or am I going to need to train my customer service people differently because I now have this new offering? So it's really thinking about, if you're making any change to your business model or your sales strategy, there is probably an implication to your people strategy. And so it's really as simple of, like, if you're making any change in your business strategy, your sales strategy, your marketing, like, okay, what's the downstream impact for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right. So what you're saying is, if you're going to scale up your business, your people strategy needs to align with how you're going to grow and drive your business, whether it's through its product line extension, growing into doing different markets, and where your next leaders are going to come from. Because as you grow, you've got to be able to have people either brought in, or you grow them internally, and then, bring people in to backfill for them to be able to do that. And that's part of the people strategy you talk about. And
it's also, if you're unfortunately scaling down due to some sort of financial thing, you need to rethink, like, okay, so what are the critical roles that I am going to need if I now need to go from 20 people to 15 people or, to 10, like, what's that going to do? And what are the key priorities? And how do I reshuffle the decks of the types of people, and how am I going to incent them to want to be there if I have to go in that direction? So both it's, scaling up, scaling down. Hey, we're thinking about being acquired. We're thinking about merging, all of those things, as the business leader is thinking about them, ideally they have a great HR partner that they're talking to, strategic partners helping them think through it. But if not, they should go find somebody, from a coaching or consulting that's going to at least help them think through what are the implications that they may not have thought about.
Yeah. Oh, that's a very good example. And what about on the energy management side of things? Kind of similar to that. I mean, what things have you found?
I think it's being realistic about how hard you can run and for how long. So we all have different thresholds of how much sleep we think we need or how much rest we think, or do we actually take vacation? So it's really figuring out what are the things that, refuel your energy tank. So for me, it might be, I need to get X amount of sleep. I need to regularly be working out. I need to take time off. I need to read periodically. I need to do some, I need some of those things away from thinking about work every day or every moment of the day. And so each leader needs to calibrate that for them, but also for their teams, they need to look at how hard have I been driving. So I have one client where they've had a really tough run for a couple of years. And that team is tired. And so it's thinking about, and we're introducing a lot more change to it. So it's really thinking about, okay, what amount of change can they take? How are we going to do this? And as I'm saying this, okay, we need to think about this a little bit more because that energy suck is a lot. And do they have the energy to go out? And if not, do I need to give breaks? Do I need to do more recognition or tell the story of why are we doing this? Like, are you really bought into it? Because when we're bought into something, even though it's hard, it's less likely to be an energy suck. It might be a time suck, but we're less likely to feel that burnout and energy if we buy into what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming up through an organization with a lot of change in Hercules, right? For those that are familiar with it here in the Wilmington area, you kind of grew up accustomed to change and running at a high pace because, when they're selling paintings off the walls, you had 4 jobs and stuff. And as we added the business and we've got it stable and we were growing it again, we got acquired and we joined an organization that had great, success, but they hadn't had some of the challenges that some of us had been through. And I remember the CEO came in to kind of talk to some of us in Wilmington. He says, I love your energy. I love your pace. Give me time to bring the rest of the organization to that. And that's just always been a very powerful message. I was like, at first I wasn't sure about the guy. I'm like, what? It was literally on his mind as a leader. Like, how do I bring the rest of the organization up to that speed? How do we train together? How do we get that so that we kind of get out there and get after things the same way across the whole organization? And eventually we did, and we had even, better success across it. So, I think that's a great
I think
thought.
that's key. I mean, like it's an insight that you have to have for yourself. Like, I know I go faster than many people, and that I've been given that coaching from my team members or from others of like, you need to slow down because they're not with you yet. Like, you're trying to go and they're not there. And so I think that's a really key leadership insight. Like, do I have them? Do they really understand? Because we also have to remember when we say, hey, do you have this? If you have any questions, excuse me, if you don't ask any questions, I assume you'll know, what we're doing. Not really going to work most times because people don't know what to say or they're uncomfortable. So it's really testing, are they really along for the ride right now?
Yeah. And so besides personally measuring it, are there any other tricks or tools that you kind of have on how to understand when you're going faster than everybody else?
Well, I think that the key thing is that you actually have to slow down to pay attention. And that's the hard part. It's like you have to have some sort of reflective process to say, or trusted advisors, whether it's people on the team, mentors around you or other people like, hey, your team, you're going like crazy. How's your team doing? And that being the catalyst for you to say, good question. I don't really know. I haven't checked in recently. Or somebody on the team who's willing to say, we're not there. Like, you got to slow down. You got to bring us along because we're dying.
Yeah. And that's something I learned for like the last 10 years. And it was accidentally in a way. I brought somebody in who didn't want to lead an organization. He had led $1 billion, specialty chemical distribution business. And he just wanted to be the corporate accounts guy. And he was really good at it. And one day he called me, he says, you're rolling downhill. It's like, what do you mean? He goes, you're going fast. You're going downhill. And he's like, you don't. I was like, so one, I learned to have somebody like that to reflect upon. Okay. Two, it's somebody that you trust. And I pushed back on him a couple of different times at different folks, but you have to have that awareness and that mindset. Okay. All right. It's not the teacher's pet, right? Because I had people kind of challenge on that. It's like, it's just that voice that, wants to go as fast as you do, but then can also, when you're not realizing it, because you probably have a lot of stressors on yourself, that, no, you need to slow down, because it gets really hard when you get, as a leader, a lot of stressors on yourself.
Well, and it's also that, what kind of person are you? If you're the more analytical leader and that's how you think and operate, you may be less sensitive in noticing some of the interpersonal dynamics. So having somebody who's the opposite to you, who's willing to be that person, is really helpful to show you the blind spots, because they're observing things. Like, I had a person on my team, and she led an operations part of our function. I was the leader. I am not the touchy-feely HR leader, but she's the person that everybody goes to talk to and just tells it. And so she was that voice to me of like, here's what's going on, around here that you may or may not be sensing, but it's happening. And so having that foil to your style is really important.
Yeah, I agree more. So, well, Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. I think, the insights and the examples that you brought on how you have to manage yourself, manage your organization, be direct, be clear, especially in times of challenge. It really help you transform your organization and just understanding where you want to go and aligning that strategy to the direction that you need to take at that point in time. So thank you for everybody who's still listening. Please subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating, and join us next week for the next episode of Scaling Up.
Thanks for having me.